On July 7, 1944, at dawn on Saipan in the Mariana Islands, one of the largest Banzai attacks of World War II was being prepared. Thousands of Japanese soldiers, including infantry from disbanded units, naval personnel, and some local militia, gathered in the Tanapag Valley, their spirits a mix of fervor and fatalism. This was the final phase of Japan's defensive campaign on this crucial island, and their commanders, including Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, had decided there was no option left but to launch a suicidal assault aimed at inflicting maximum casualties on the Americans, hoping to bring glory and honor to the empire. This force, numbering around 4,000, included wounded soldiers and was organized into assault teams. Those on crutches or severely injured were also ordered to participate, some armed with grenades, and given instructions to throw them at U.S. forces upon breaching defensive lines. Even civilians, including women and adolescents, were mobilized and equipped with rudimentary weapons such as bamboo spears for this final charge. Their objective was the American-occupied zone, where infantry battalions and artillery units had been systematically deployed, with positions carefully surveyed and firing coordinates pre-calculated. Unbeknownst to the Japanese soldiers, they were advancing into an extremely sophisticated and modern artillery network, something nearly unimaginable to them. This system included fire direction centers, FDCs, capable of calculating precise coordinates, environmental factors, and continuously adjusting fire to maximize effect. Forward observers were assigned to each battalion and maintained direct communication with FDCs via radio and wire, ready to call fire on any enemy movement they observed. Every artillery piece, from 105 mm to 155 mm, as well as naval guns, had been surveyed and prepared to fire on designated grid coordinates, allowing a massive volume of fire to be deployed simultaneously with pinpoint accuracy. What made this particularly lethal was the time-on-target method, where all shells from multiple guns would land on the target at the same moment, creating a surprise effect that was virtually impossible for the attacking Japanese forces to evade or counter, as every calculation, from gun range to projectile speed and conditions, had been meticulously coordinated. Meanwhile, Japanese morale was driven by the philosophy of Gyokusai, or shattering honor to preserve it in death. This ideal had deeply shaped soldiers and commanders, regarding death in battle as the ultimate path to glory, a manifestation of the Yamato spirit. They believed courage and a willingness to sacrifice could compensate for technological and equipment deficiencies. Lessons from previous campaigns, such as Guadalcanal in 1942 and Tarawa in 1943, where numerous Banzai charges had been decimated by American firepower, were not fully applied. Japanese military culture emphasized tradition and honor, viewing retreat or defensive posturing as shameful, which led to the decision to launch a massive frontal assault despite its extreme tactical risk. On the American side, preparations for the impending attack were meticulous. Intelligence, including decrypted Japanese communications, indicated an unusual silence from Japanese artillery, signaling that they were conserving ammunition for a final strike. U.S. forward observers reported abnormal movements in Japanese ranks after dark, and battalion commanders positioned troops along likely approaches while preparing all fire control centers for response. FDCs divided the island into grid sectors, with each gun knowing the coordinates, range, and azimuth for each square. These careful preparations ensured that when firing orders were issued, multiple guns could simultaneously deliver precise fire on predetermined targets. As night fell over Tonopah Valley, the Japanese began moving, carrying weapons and banners, shouting the battle cry Banzai, Banzai as a spiritual symbol. Wounded soldiers crawled alongside comrades or were carried on stretchers, while civilians followed, ready to sacrifice themselves. Their preparations were more symbolic and spiritual than tactical. They could not know that American positions, equipped with artillery, mortars, and naval fire, would turn the valley into a deadly trap at the first step. While the Japanese relied on fighting spirit and courage to break American lines, the Americans understood this was a moment to test the effectiveness of their artillery system. U.S. battalions, including the 105th Infantry Regiment and artillery units, were rigorously prepared. Every gun surveyed and registered. Every forward observer ready to coordinate with command centers. This network made each Japanese advance a lethal target. The American objective was not merely defense, but to demonstrate the superiority of industrialized warfare, where organization, technology, and mathematics controlled the battlefield. In this context, the Banzai Charge was no ordinary assault, but a clash of entirely different war philosophies. Japanese martial spirit, honor, and samurai ethos versus American systematic firepower, precision, and concentrated force. American commanders from regiments to battalions recognized this would be a decisive battle, where any small error could result in heavy casualties, but if the system functioned properly, it would prove that technology and organization could completely overwhelm courage and traditional tactics. The atmosphere before the battle was tense and tragic. Japanese soldiers, believing in Gyokusai and the Yamato spirit, prepared to march toward death with resounding cries of Banzai. They had never faced an artillery system capable of coordinated, synchronized precision. Meanwhile, American units waited patiently, each forward observer tracking advancing formations, and FDCs double-checking calculations for range, azimuth, time of fire, weather factors, and other technical parameters to ensure that once the attack commenced, all shells would strike the enemy simultaneously. This entire scenario highlights the stark contrast between two philosophies and methods of warfare. Japan relied on spirit, courage, and samurai tradition, seeing death in battle as the ultimate honor, while the U.S. relied on technology, calculation, and coordinated firepower, turning war into a scientific process. The Banzai Charge at Saipan symbolizes the confrontation between bravery and organized strength, between tradition and technology, and between death for honor and death at the hands of a systematic, mechanized force. All of these elements, the assembled Japanese force, their fighting spirit, American tactical preparations, and the clash of war philosophies, set the stage for the next phase of the battle, where the Banzai Charge would collide head-on with modern firepower, producing one of World War II's most iconic massacres and reshaping how the world perceived human strength and its role in modern warfare.
As Japanese soldiers began moving under the darkness of dawn on July 7, 1944, they had no idea they were facing a firepower far beyond any combat experience they had ever known. The U.S. forces on Saipan had prepared an extremely sophisticated artillery network, combining ground and naval artillery units with fire direction centers, or FDCs, acting as the brain coordinating the entire attack. Each gun, from 105 mm to 155 mm, had been surveyed and prepared with coordinates accurate to the inch, ready to fire on the grid squares mapped in advance. Forward observers were assigned to each infantry battalion, equipped with SCR-300 and SCR-610 radios. allowing direct communication with command centers and other guns without interruption from gunfire, smoke, or battlefield chaos. This was the first time an American force deployed a coordinated fire system with such precision and speed, turning every step of the Japanese advance into an easily targeted kill zone. One of the most critical elements of American firepower was the time-on-target concept. Rather than firing as individual units were ready, all shells were calculated to strike the target simultaneously. This required complex calculations, factoring in distance, azimuth, projectile velocity, and environmental variables such as temperature, humidity, wind, and barrel condition. FDCs used graphical firing tables and M10 plotting boards to track multiple targets simultaneously, allowing them to solve complex firing problems in seconds rather than minutes. Each time fire was called by a forward observer, the FDC immediately calculated data for all participating guns, from long range to short range, and issued firing orders so they would discharge at precisely the right moment. As Japanese soldiers entered Tanapag Valley, hundreds of shells were already in position, ready to explode the instant they appeared. Over 150 guns, including both land artillery and naval fire from 6 battleships and 8 cruisers, were integrated into this system. Army and Marine artillery battalions coordinated closely, with each unit knowing in advance its firing coordinates for each grid square on the map. Weeks of preparation, surveying, and rehearsal had ensured everything was ready. The FDC of the 10th Marine Division, commanded by Colonel Louis Miser, divided the entire island into digital grid squares, with firing data pre-calculated for each. When the firing order was given, all guns fired in sequence. Distant guns first, closer guns afterward, so all rounds would hit the target simultaneously, producing an unavoidable, shocking effect. This technique, combined with danger-close firing and the specially developed Banzai fire ladder method, allowed American artillery to adjust fire dynamically as the enemy advanced. As Japanese formations moved forward, the FDC continuously calculated and called adjustments, with fire sweeping through the valley in waves like a giant scythe. 105mm and 155mm shells, along with naval rounds, exploded in unison, creating fireballs and shock waves that annihilated entire formations before they could reach American lines. Forward observers, positioned on hills or other safe vantage points, tracked every enemy movement and called adjustments to maximize damage, producing coordination unprecedented in warfare. Naval fire also played a decisive role. Battleships such as USS Tennessee and USS Louisville fired hundreds of 14-inch and 8-inch shells, illuminating the battlefield with flares and obliterating Japanese assembly points with high explosive rounds. Naval observers coordinated with land command centers to ensure all naval shells landed simultaneously with the ground artillery. The integration of artillery and naval fire, coupled with reliable radio communications, created an almost impenetrable wall of fire, leaving Japanese Banzai formations almost no chance of survival. Another critical factor was the U.S. ability to sustain continuous fire and adjust to enemy movement. Unlike Japanese artillery, which relied on direct observation and signals or runners to relay orders, American units could monitor every step of the enemy and adjust fire in real time. FDCs could calculate fire against moving groups, producing continuous streams of artillery sweeping across enemy formations. This made Banzai tactics, relying on massed courage and morale, effectively useless against meticulously coordinated, precisely timed American firepower. Meticulous preparation also included meteorological support, with teams monitoring wind, temperature, and pressure hourly, supplying data to command centers to adjust range and firing angles. Each gun was precisely calibrated according to barrel condition, ammunition type, and environmental factors, ensuring shells struck targets optimally. Together, these elements created a modern artillery system where mathematics, technology, and organization worked in unison, turning the battlefield into a mechanical process in which every enemy movement could be calculated and destroyed. The difference between American and Japanese firepower was not just technological, but philosophical. While the Japanese relied on traditional tactics and fighting spirit, the Americans had industrialized warfare, calculating every shell with maximum precision, running command centers like perfect coordination machines, and using forward observers as the system's eyes. As the Banzai charge began, Japanese soldiers entered Tanapag Valley like prey, completely unaware of the overwhelming power awaiting them. With the integration of ground and naval artillery, continuous adjustment by FDCs, forward observers, and the time-on-target system, American firepower reached its peak, ready to annihilate any formation in range. This Banzai charge became the ultimate test of the American artillery system and a demonstration of the superiority of industrialized warfare, where technology, mathematics, and organization overwhelmed the courage and spirit of enemy soldiers. In this context, American firepower was not merely a defensive tool, but a symbol of modern warfare's evolution. It proved that in the era of concentrated, coordinated fire, individual bravery and traditional tactics were insufficient for victory. Every step of the Japanese advance was observed, every action calculated and met with precise, synchronized firepower, leaving them no chance of survival. This confrontation was not an ordinary battle, but the ultimate test of scientific warfare, where system, technology, and mathematics dominated, turning the Banzai charge, a symbol of Japanese fighting spirit, into an inevitable massacre.
At dawn over Tanapag Valley on July 7, 1944, approximately 4,000 Japanese soldiers, including survivors from the 136th Infantry Regiment, naval personnel, and aviation technicians, began moving in formation, preparing for the largest Banzai charge of World War II in the Pacific. The wounded followed in successive waves, some armed with grenades to use against American positions, while women and adolescents carried bamboo spears, moving at the rear with orders to charge into battle to demonstrate their loyalty. All of this was directed by the final orders of Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, who regarded the assault as a death ritual, an opportunity to display the Yamato Damashi, the Japanese fighting spirit, before ending his own life along with the remaining soldiers. However, the Americans' meticulous preparations turned this attack into a nightmare for the Japanese. Forward observers on elevated positions immediately identified enemy formations and called fire onto grid 164223. Within less than 90 seconds, ground artillery from 18 battalions, combined with naval fire, unleashed simultaneous barrages that obliterated the first waves. Shells exploded from multiple directions, breaking formations and killing hundreds of Japanese soldiers in mere minutes. 105mm and 155mm shells, along with 14-inch and 8-inch naval gunfire, detonated in unison, making every advance nearly impossible. As the Banzai charge pressed forward, the Americans employed ladder fire techniques, adjusting fire line by line, sweeping across advancing formations. Observers continuously reported enemy movements, corrected coordinates, and requested additional fire to clear cover such as trenches, gullies, and ravines, where the Japanese sought to avoid artillery. The
The effect was devastating. Advance routes were destroyed, valleys became death traps, and Japanese soldiers were forced to step over the bodies of fallen comrades to continue moving forward. A notable feature of the battle was the Americans' ability to sustain close-range fire while minimizing the risk of friendly casualties. Artillery combined with 60mm and 81mm mortars adjusted fire at close distances, sweeping enemy formations while U.S. battalions held defensive lines. Small Japanese groups occasionally penetrated U.S. positions, surviving the overwhelming artillery fire, only to be quickly eliminated by close-quarters combat and Marine counterattacks. Throughout the battle, American artillery units demonstrated unprecedented coordination. As Japanese groups regrouped for subsequent assaults, FDCs monitored and adjusted fire from multiple directions, ensuring no enemy position remained safe. The integration of ground and naval fire allowed full control of the battlefield. Battleships such as USS Tennessee and USS Louisville illuminated the battlefield with flares, destroyed remaining assembly points, and coordinated with land artillery to maintain continuous pressure. Despite witnessing the carnage, American soldiers carried out their duties. Heroic actions were recorded. Lieutenant Colonel William J. O'Brien operated a machine gun from a jeep while wounded, killing dozens of Japanese soldiers. Sergeant Thomas A. Baker fought with grenades and personal weapons, eliminating dozens before sacrificing his life. And Captain Benjamin L. Solomon, the battalion doctor, defended his comrades and wounded soldiers, killing over 98 enemies before falling. These acts not only saved many American lives, but also demonstrated courage and adaptability in the chaos of combat. Within the first few hours, the Banzai charge was utterly destroyed. While small groups attempted to breach American lines, they were quickly neutralized. The close coordination of artillery, close-quarters fire, mortars, and naval gunfire ensured that any enemy movement was calculated and destroyed. U.S. formations, discipline, and rapid response rendered Banzai tactics, based on morale and numbers, effectively meaningless. Official figures show that after 15 hours of fighting, over 4,300 Japanese soldiers were killed. American casualties numbered around 1,000, mostly from units directly confronting infiltrating groups. FDCs coordinated more than 12,000 rounds, from ground artillery to naval gunfire, creating a perfect combination of firepower and tactical calculation. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Walton noted in his official report, "The enemy attacked with great courage, but without modern tactical awareness. Our fire system operated precisely as designed." A key aspect of the battle was that American firepower did not merely kill Japanese soldiers, it prevented them from regrouping for renewed attacks. Every valley, ravine, and open area was observed and covered by fire, leaving no opportunity for reorganization. The wounded who survived attempted desperate actions, using grenades or personal weapons to rush forward, but were swiftly eliminated. The combination of coordinated fire, forward observation, and continuous adjustment demonstrated that in modern warfare, individual fighting spirit cannot overcome scientifically organized firepower. By sunrise, the scene on Saipan resembled a catastrophe. Tanapag Alley was littered with Japanese corpses, while exhausted but surviving American units surveyed the battlefield with sober recognition of their victory. Reports confirmed that the largest Banzai charge in the Pacific had been completely destroyed, demonstrating the overwhelming power of American firepower and coordinated artillery systems. Surviving Japanese forces fled to caves in northern Saipan, continuing minor resistance, but no longer capable of mounting organized mass attacks. The Battle of Saipan was not only a testament to American technological and organizational strength, but also a warning to other military forces about the effectiveness of coordinated fire in modern warfare. It proved that even large, courageous, determined formations could not overcome forces meticulously organized and calculated. The Banzai charge, a symbol of Japanese fighting spirit, was transformed into a disaster, illustrating the unbridgeable gap between traditional warfare and industrial warfare. The horrific slaughter in Tanapag Valley also left a lasting psychological impact on American soldiers. They witnessed extraordinary courage and fighting spirit, yet faced the overwhelming effectiveness of coordinated firepower, learning that modern war is not a game of personal bravery, but the result of preparation, calculation, and technology. They understood that in industrial warfare, humans are part of a system, and technology and organization determine the ultimate outcome. The Banzai charge on Saipan ended by mid-morning, but its consequences echoed for years. Over 4,300 Japanese soldiers were killed, almost all participants, while American units suffered about 1,000 casualties, mainly from battalions directly confronting infiltrating groups. FDCs coordinated more than 12,000 rounds, from ground artillery to naval gunfire, creating a perfect combination of firepower and tactical calculation. This battle did not merely destroy an attacking formation, it made industrial warfare theory a reality on the battlefield, proving that extraordinary courage alone cannot overcome power that is perfectly organized, calculated, and coordinated.
When the nightmare of the Banzai charge ended, the battlefield at Tanapag Valley appeared as a catastrophic tableau of organized destruction. Fire direction centers, ground artillery, mortars, and naval gunfire had turned thousands of Japanese soldiers into mere figures on a map, a vivid demonstration of the absolute dominance of industrialized warfare. The staggering casualties were not just tactical data. They reflected the stark disparity between technological power and traditional fighting spirit. According to official records, approximately 4,311 Japanese soldiers were killed in the assault, most of them direct participants, representing near total losses. U.S. casualties numbered around 1,000, primarily among units directly under attack. The 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 105th Regiment suffered 406 dead and 512 wounded, nearly 80% of the losses for the frontline forces. The 3rd Battalion of the 10th Marines recorded 127 casualties, including both wounded and killed. The volume of firepower expended also made Saipan a living testament to the effectiveness of combining technology and tactics. Over 12,000 artillery rounds were fired during the 15 hours of combat, including fire from 18 artillery battalions and naval support with 615 large-caliber rounds, alongside thousands of mortar shells. Calculated by efficiency, roughly 3 shells were fired per Japanese casualty, highlighting the industrialized power of modern warfare. The FDCs coordinated seamlessly, using graphical firing tables, precise measuring instruments, and multi-layered radio and wire communications, turning each engagement into an almost perfectly solved organizational and tactical problem. The strategic consequences of the Saipan Banzai charge extended far beyond the battlefield. The loss of over 4,000 soldiers in a single day shocked Tokyo. The catastrophic defeat contributed to the dismissal of Prime Minister Hideki Tojo on July 18, 1944, just 11 days after Saipan fell to the Americans. Losing Saipan also opened the way for B-29 bombers to reach closer to Tokyo, with a range of 1,250 miles, initiating bombing raids on Japan by the end of 1944. For Japan, the Banzai charge was not only a military defeat, but a strategic shock, showing that fighting spirit and courage, however remarkable, could not overcome coordinated firepower and superior American technology. Psychologically, American soldiers witnessed an unprecedented level of slaughter, a combined strategic and human experience. Many were haunted by the lethal efficiency of coordinated fire, realizing that victory came not from bravery or personal skill, but from organized systems, calculation, and technology. Arthur Robinson, a survivor from the 105th Regiment, recalled that they did not want to kill all the Japanese soldiers, but had no choice as the enemy continued to advance. The trauma of witnessing industrialized killing to protect oneself deeply impacted their understanding of modern warfare. Victory comes from organization and technology, not individual courage. American fire coordination and battlefield organization not only destroyed Japanese formations, but also eliminated any opportunity for the enemy to regroup. Valleys, ravines, and open positions were all monitored and covered with overhead shells, creating a continuous death grid. Even wounded soldiers attempting desperate actions were quickly neutralized. This proved that in modern warfare, calculation, technology, and efficient organization dictate outcomes far more than courage or fighting spirit. Individual acts of heroism still stood out amidst the chaos. Lieutenant Colonel William J. O'Brien manned a machine gun from a jeep, resisting enemy infiltrators with extraordinary determination. Sergeant Thomas A. Baker fought with grenades and personal weapons to protect comrades. And Captain Benjamin L. Solomon, the battalion doctor, killed 98 Japanese soldiers to protect the wounded before sacrificing himself. These deeds demonstrated human courage, but also highlighted the contrast with technological power. No matter how heroic, individuals could not alter outcomes determined by coordinated firepower. The Saipan battlefield also illustrated the overwhelming effectiveness of American firepower compared to traditional Japanese combat methods. U.S. artillery units were prepared with coordinates accurate to the meter, linked to forward observers via SCR-300 and SCR-610 radios, capable of instant fire adjustment based on enemy movement. Using M7 firing tables and M10 maps, they accounted for complex variables such as wind direction, temperature, barrel wear, and powder pressure, producing synchronized barrages down to the second. This enabled the Americans to employ time on target, ensuring shells from multiple directions hit simultaneously, maximizing both physical and psychological impact on Japanese forces. A critical tactical lesson was how the Americans combined artillery, naval gunfire, and mortars to maintain continuous battlefield control. Even when Japanese units moved into gaps or ravines, they were detected and eliminated. The integration of multiple types of fire allowed the U.S. forces to dominate the battlefield, reduce infiltration risk, and maximize lethality. FDCs tracked enemy movements continuously, adjusting fire with each step, demonstrating that modern warfare relies on scientific calculation and synchronized coordination rather than chance or individual courage. The strategic consequences for Japan were long-lasting. The heavy losses in a single Banzai charge made Japanese officers acutely aware that fighting spirit and courage could not defeat modern coordinated firepower. Some officers, like Tadamichi Kuribayoshi on Iwo Jima and Mitsuru Ushijima on Okinawa, learned from this experience, avoiding Banzai charges and instead employing defensive tactics and slow, deliberate fire to maximize casualties on the Americans. Yet overall, the Japanese army retained the tradition of massed assaults, not entirely abandoning Banzai charges, leading to similar disasters at Guam, Tinian, Peleliu, and Okinawa. The Battle of Saipan also highlighted the human cost of industrial warfare. When technology and organization dominate, courage and traditional tactics become ineffective. Over 4,000 Japanese soldiers perished in an assault with virtually no chance of survival. U.S. casualties, around 1,000, underscored the efficiency of coordinated firepower. Fire techniques, including pre-planning, continuous adjustment, and integration of multiple fire sources, proved that industrial warfare is a matter of efficiency, organization, and technology. Beyond tactics and casualties, Saipan reflected the clash of two military philosophies. Japan relied on Yamato Damashi and faith in victory through spirit and courage, while the U.S. relied on firepower, technology, and organization. The outcome of the Saipan Banzai charge demonstrated that in modern warfare, systems and technology determine the final result, rendering personal bravery meaningless against superior coordinated power.
The Banzai charge at Saipan was not only a human disaster for the Japanese military, but also carried profound strategic significance, shaping American perceptions of modern warfare and laying the foundation for combat methods for decades to come. Strategically, Saipan was a decisive turning point in the Pacific War, paving the way for U.S. B-29 bombers to reach Japan and directly influencing the fall of Hideki Tojo's government. With over 4,000 Japanese soldiers killed in a single assault, Tokyo realized that adhering to the traditional Banzai charge was tantamount to suicide against the technological and coordinated firepower of the United States. This failure not only shook Japanese politics, but forced the military to reconsider its combat methods and learn from America's industrialized approach to warfare. Tactically, the Battle of Saipan was proof of the maximum effectiveness of coordinated fire and scientifically organized combat. The U.S. Fire Direction Centers, or FDCs, transformed artillery from an art based on personal experience into a precise science. These centers combined data from forward observers, calculated fire based on coordinates accurate to the meter, and adjusted for environmental factors, weather, barrel wear, and timed so that shells from multiple directions struck simultaneously. Rather than firing by instinct or intuition, each barrage was a calculated operation solved through numbers, maps, and multi-layered communication systems. The result was simultaneous barrages that decimated thousands of Japanese soldiers in minutes, demonstrating that in modern warfare, technology and organization can overwhelm individual spirit and skill. A second major lesson was the shift in warfare thinking from individual tactics to industrialized war. Before Saipan, Japan relied on Yamato damashi and samurai tradition, believing that spirit and courage were decisive. The Banzai charge showed that even the bravest spirit was meaningless against a precisely calculated and coordinated fire system. This contrast between traditional fighting spirit and industrialized power highlighted the philosophical difference between the U.S. and Japan. The Americans approached war as a technical and organizational problem, while the Japanese approached it as a spiritual and moral challenge. The outcome made clear that technology consistently prevailed over spirit in direct confrontation, and Saipan became a living demonstration of this principle. Strategically, Saipan shaped how the U.S. prepared for future battles and trained new generations of soldiers. The experience reinforced the belief that coordinated fire and organization were central to modern warfare. Techniques such as time on target, calculating simultaneous strikes from multiple directions, integrating artillery, mortars, and naval gunfire, as well as incorporating forward observers into the communications network, became standard training. In later conflicts, from Korea to Vietnam, these principles were applied almost unchanged. For instance, at the Battle of Chipyong in 1951 during the Korean War, coordinated firepower similarly destroyed Chinese human wave assaults, proving the enduring value of lessons from Saipan beyond the Pacific context. Saipan also raised important ethical and humanitarian questions. Over 4,000 Japanese soldiers died, while roughly 1,000 Americans were wounded, with the casualty ratio heavily favoring the U.S. This starkly strategic yet tragic reality, while victory was necessary and ensured American safety, turning the enemy's assault into a killing conveyor belt, exposed the frightening aspect of industrialized warfare. Human lives reduced to numbers, with personal bravery rendered meaningless. U.S. veterans of Saipan admitted to being haunted by the effectiveness of the killing,
realizing that victory derived from system, technology, and organization, not courage or skill. Another lesson was the importance of intelligence and strategic calculation in defense. Japan opted for an all-out attack despite U.S. advantages in terrain and firepower, resulting in nearly total losses among Japanese troops. Officers such as Kuribayashi and Ushijima learned from this experience, adapting tactics on other islands to employ defensive measures, ambushes, and terrain exploitation to reduce casualties and challenge U.S. forces, proving that Saipan was a critical lesson in the need for tactical adaptation in modern warfare. Technologically, Saipan demonstrated the effectiveness of integrating information, communications, and calculations into the battlefield. SCR-300 and SCR-610 radios allowed forward observers to relay information instantly to multiple FDCs, while plotting boards and firing tables solved complex fire problems in seconds. This coordination transformed artillery from a standalone tool into an operational system, capable of controlling and optimizing each barrage for maximum effect. These methods laid the groundwork for modern command and control systems, from infantry operations to mechanized warfare and precision technology today. Strategically, Saipan also highlighted the power of intelligence. The U.S. prepared in advance by analyzing intelligence, tracking Japanese artillery silence, predicting attack directions, and deploying forces efficiently. Anticipating the Banzai charge and preparing a synchronized fire system allowed Americans to maximize effectiveness, minimize casualties, and annihilate the assault. This demonstrated that in modern warfare, information, foresight, and precise tactical planning can outweigh morale or troop numbers. Saipan also shaped perceptions of combat efficiency in the industrial age. Americans realized that in battles with modern coordinated firepower, traditional methods relying on courage and fighting spirit could not protect forces or achieve strategic goals. Technology, organization, and calculation determined victory. This lesson influenced U.S. military strategy from the Pacific War to Korea, Vietnam, and later campaigns, including precise artillery use, long-range air power, and modern command and control systems. A philosophical and psychological aspect of Saipan was its demonstration of the industrialization of death in war. Over 4,000 Japanese soldiers were killed, mostly within hours, with overwhelming casualty ratios, showing that coordinated power could turn war into a mathematical process. Numbers, systems, and firepower determined outcomes. This raised questions about courage, honor, and humanity in industrialized warfare. Can fighting spirit matter when the enemy has superior technology and perfect organization? Saipan answered unequivocally, individual courage alone cannot secure victory. Finally, the strategic significance of Saipan is evident in its long-term impact on how the U.S. and the world view warfare. FDCs, time-on-target calculations, and the integration of artillery, mortars, and naval gunfire became standard training, applied in Korea, Vietnam, and even the Gulf War. From Saipan to modern conflicts, the concept of coordinated firepower, information integration, and precise calculation remains central to military strategy. Saipan also marked the end of an era in warfare. The Banzai charge, symbolizing courage, samurai spirit, and Shinto belief, became an obsolete form of attack in the age of modern firepower. Saipan demonstrated that in industrialized warfare, victory belongs not to the bravest or most resilient, but to those best organized, utilizing technology efficiently, and coordinating fire scientifically. These lessons directly influenced U.S. strategy in the Pacific War and shaped military approaches for the next half-century.
From a historical and strategic perspective, the Banzai charge at Saipan symbolizes the clash of two military philosophies, fighting spirit versus technology. It proves that when these forces collide, technology and organized combat always prevail. The Japanese army, though brave and dedicated, became victims of American technical superiority. This event also served as a warning. In modern warfare, victory depends not only on human strength, but on the ability to organize, coordinate, and apply technology precisely. Ultimately, Saipan affirmed that courage, while necessary, is insufficient in modern warfare. The outcome of the Banzai charge demonstrated the need to combine fighting spirit with strategy, technology, and organization. The U.S. artillery system at Saipan, from FDCs and time-on-target calculations to coordinated fire, multi-layered communications, and scenario forecasting, turned war into an industrialized art